Imagine you're shopping for a new car. You open Google, you check out a Toyota, maybe a BMW, maybe a Mercedes, and then, for some reason, you click on Rolls-Royce. You see the price, $300,000, and you think, wait, for a car? Because for that kind of money, you could buy a pretty nice house in parts of America. You could buy several really good cars. Or if you're feeling financially responsible, you could just keep the money. But Rolls-Royce buyers don't seem particularly interested in that last option. And here's the weird part. A Rolls-Royce isn't the fastest car in the world. It isn't the most powerful. It doesn't have the biggest engine. So why does one cost more than several perfectly good cars combined? Is it the leather, the wood, the engine, the hand-built craftsmanship? Well, yes, but that's only the beginning. Because Rolls-Royce isn't really selling you a car. It's selling you something much harder to put a price on. Exclusivity. And to understand why that gets so expensive, we need to start with something incredibly simple. A door. It's just a door, right? Take a look at a Rolls-Royce door. It doesn't look particularly revolutionary. It's a door. You open it, you get inside, you close it. Congratulations, you've successfully used a door. Except Rolls-Royce doesn't really believe in doing things the normal way. Their doors are large, heavy, and engineered to close with an unusually smooth, controlled motion. And that matters, because Rolls-Royce isn't just asking, does the door work? They're asking, what does the door feel like? That's a very different question. Most car companies want you to notice the engine. Rolls-Royce wants you to notice how quietly the door closes. Most manufacturers want you to feel the acceleration. Rolls-Royce wants you to feel like you've entered a private lounge that just happens to have four wheels. And that's basically the Rolls-Royce philosophy. Take something ordinary and make it unnecessarily excellent. A door? Make it special. A seat? Make it a luxury chair. The roof? Why leave it empty? Put stars in it. Yes, actual stars.
The ceiling has stars. Rolls-Royce offers something called the Starlight Headliner. Basically, hundreds of tiny fiber optic lights are integrated into the roof of the cabin. So when you sit inside, you can look up and see what appears to be a night sky. Now, is this necessary? Absolutely not. Does your car need a miniature galaxy above your head? Not even remotely. But that's exactly the point. Because Rolls-Royce isn't competing with Toyota on the question of what does a car actually need. Toyota asks, will it start every morning? Rolls-Royce asks, would you like the ceiling to look like the night sky? And apparently, some people say yes, very confidently.
So what are you actually paying for? Now let's get to the money. A modern Rolls-Royce can easily start in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And once you start adding options, well, things get interesting. Really interesting. Because Rolls-Royce has a whole world of customization known as bespoke. And this is where the car stops being just a car. You can choose different colors, different leather, different wood, different stitching, different finishes, different details throughout the cabin. And if you have enough money, you can basically say, I want something nobody else has. And Rolls-Royce can say, okay. That's powerful. Because imagine being extremely wealthy. You already have the nice house, you already have the expensive watch, you already have the supercar. And then you realize someone else has the exact same one. That's a problem Rolls-Royce is very good at solving. Because the real luxury isn't necessarily, I own something expensive. It's, I own something that almost nobody else has.
This is where the price starts getting crazy. Let's say you buy a Rolls-Royce. You're already spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then you start customizing it. Maybe you want a special paint color, not just blue. No, you want a very specific shade of blue. Maybe you want leather that matches it. Maybe you want a particular type of wood. Maybe you want custom stitching. Maybe you want your family crest somewhere inside. And suddenly, your options list looks less like a car configurator and more like you're designing a private jet. At some point, you probably shouldn't even be clicking anymore, because every click is basically, congratulations,
you just spent another few $1,000s. But here's why wealthy customers are willing to do it. They're not comparing the Rolls-Royce to a Honda. They're comparing it to other luxury experiences. A private jet, a yacht, a custom watch, a piece of art. And suddenly, a $400,000 car doesn't look quite as crazy. Well, maybe it still does. But at least now we understand the logic.
It's not about speed. Here's another strange thing about Rolls-Royce. It's not obsessed with being the fastest, and that's unusual in the luxury car world. Because if you buy a Lamborghini, the car basically wants you to know it's fast. You press the accelerator, and suddenly your organs are negotiating new employment contracts. A Rolls-Royce takes a different approach. It's powerful, very powerful. But it doesn't need to scream about it. The goal is smoothness, quietness, effortless acceleration. The feeling that the car has more power than you'll ever actually need. And honestly, that's probably the most Rolls-Royce thing imaginable. It's like having a bodybuilder who never talks about working out. He doesn't need to. You can tell.
The magic carpet ride. Rolls-Royce famously describes its driving experience as a magic carpet ride. And no, the car doesn't actually have a magic carpet underneath it. Unfortunately, that would make this video much more interesting. Instead, the idea is simple. The suspension is designed to absorb road imperfections and make the ride feel incredibly smooth. The car uses advanced suspension technology and sensors to constantly adapt to what's happening underneath it. The result? You're cruising down the road and the outside world feels strangely distant. Pothole? What pothole? Speed bump? Barely noticed. And that brings us to one of the most important differences between a Rolls-Royce and a performance car. A performance car wants you to feel the road. A Rolls-Royce wants you to forget the road exists.
Then there's the quiet. One of the biggest luxury features in a Rolls-Royce isn't something you can easily photograph. It's silence. The cabin is heavily engineered to isolate passengers from outside noise. The tires, the windows, the doors, the insulation, the drivetrain. Everything contributes to one goal: make the outside world disappear. And this is actually a brilliant luxury strategy, because what do wealthy people have less of than almost anything else? Time. And when you're constantly surrounded by phones, emails, meetings, traffic, notifications, and people asking you for things, silence becomes valuable. Very valuable. A Rolls-Royce isn't just saying, here's a comfortable seat. It's saying, for the next hour, nobody bothers you. And apparently, that can be worth a lot of money.
The engine isn't even the most important part. Under the hood, Rolls-Royce uses powerful engines. But here's something interesting. If all you cared about was horsepower, you could spend much less money and get a car that's just as fast, or even faster. So why doesn't Rolls-Royce simply build the fastest car possible? Because that's not the product. Think about it. If Rolls-Royce wanted to make the fastest luxury sedan in America, they could chase that number. But then what? Another company beats it next year? And another company beats that one? Suddenly, you're in a horsepower arms race. Rolls-Royce isn't interested. Because its competition isn't really horsepower. Its competition is experience. How smoothly does it move? How quiet is it? How comfortable is it? How personalized is it? How rare is it? And most importantly, how does it make the owner feel?
The hand-built part. Another major reason Rolls-Royce costs so much is labor. These aren't cars that are simply flying down a giant assembly line at incredible speed. There is a significant amount of skilled human craftsmanship involved. Leather is carefully selected. Wood is prepared and finished. Stitching is inspected. Paint is applied with enormous attention to detail. And certain parts require highly trained specialists. Now, this is where the economics get interesting. Imagine you have a factory producing hundreds of thousands of cars. You want speed, efficiency, automation, repeatability. Every second matters. Now, imagine the opposite. You're producing far fewer vehicles, and each customer wants something different. Suddenly, efficiency becomes less important than craftsmanship. And craftsmanship is expensive. A machine can repeat the same process thousands of times. A skilled person can look at something and say, "Nope, that's not good enough," and do it again. That's not cheap.
The spirit of ecstasy. You've probably seen it. That small silver figure leaning forward over the front of the car. It looks elegant, but there's something funny about it. You're driving around in a car that costs more than some houses, and the tiny woman on the hood is basically saying, "Don't worry, I've got this." But that little emblem represents something important. Rolls-Royce has spent more than a century building an identity around luxury. And once a brand becomes that recognizable, you're no longer just paying for engineering. You're paying for history, reputation, design, heritage, and status.
But is a Rolls-Royce actually worth the money? Now we have to ask the uncomfortable question. Is it actually worth it? And the honest answer is, it depends. If you want the most horsepower per dollar, absolutely not. If you want the best performance, definitely not. If you want the most practical car, please don't buy a Rolls-Royce. You'd be using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. But if you want something incredibly comfortable, extremely quiet, highly personalized, and rare, then suddenly the price makes more sense. Because luxury has never really been about getting the most for your money. It's about getting something you don't need, but really want. And Rolls-Royce has mastered that idea.
The real reason it costs so much. So, why does a Rolls-Royce cost so much? The simple answer is because almost everything about it is designed to feel special. The materials are expensive. The craftsmanship is expensive. The engineering is expensive. The customization is expensive. The production numbers are relatively low. The brand itself is valuable. And then there's the biggest factor of all, exclusivity. A $30,000 car needs to convince you that it's a good deal. A $300,000 car has to convince you that it's something different. And $1 million Rolls-Royce? At that point, you're not really buying transportation anymore. You're buying a statement. You're saying, I don't need the practical option. And maybe that's the entire point. Because when money stops being the biggest limitation, people start paying for things that most of us don't even think about. Silence, craftsmanship, personalization, rarity, and the ability to say, make mine different. So the next time you see a Rolls-Royce driving down the street, don't just look at the price tag. Look at what you're actually paying for. You're paying for a car that doesn't need to be the fastest, doesn't need to be the loudest, doesn't need to be the most practical. It just needs to make its owner feel like there is nowhere else they'd rather be. And maybe that's why Rolls-Royce is so expensive. Because anybody can build a car that gets you from point A to point B. But convincing someone to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to make that journey feel completely effortless, that's the real luxury. And honestly,
If your car has a roof full of stars, a door that closes itself, and costs more than my house, I'd probably take the scenic route too.